Property Investing Insights, your authority on all things property investing, finance and wealth creation with Right Property Group.
Well, good day everyone and welcome to Property Investing Insights. You probably noticed that our setup's a little bit different. Our friends that we film are renovating and relocating the studio, so we decided to let them grace us in our office. So this is our office space, and over the last couple of months we've been talking about how to design your decade and how a dynamic portfolio unfolds. And during the Christmas party, Ratko actually came across to me and said he's quite happy to talk about his journey. Our journey started back in 2016.
Correct.
And you already had a couple of properties under your belt before you came over to the dark side. And we've done quite a few properties. But before we go down that path, do tell us a few things about you. What do you do and how did you start on this investment journey?
So I moved to Australia 24 years ago, and electrical engineer by trade. So not really anybody that would know much more about building, but as a kid I worked with my grandfather. He was a builder.
Yep.
But certainly property was very attractive for me to start really well built, and that's how I started back in 2003. I bought the first property. Obviously didn't know much what I'm buying, but it was like a nice property to buy.
Yep.
And another one. And obviously along the journey, I realized that I need help from professionals to really start focusing myself, and that's how we started.
Okay. And so obviously you're a migrant. Which country did you come in from?
I came from Serbia. Yugoslavia.
And so your dad was a builder in Serbia?
My grandfather.
Grandfather was, yes. And your qualifications, was it a Serbian qualification or was it?
Yeah, electrical engineering, which is recognized in Australia, yeah.
Right. So you came straight to a job?
Yes, straight to a job and still there 24 years later.
Right. So you don't like change then?
No, well, looks like I found the right place.
Yes, absolutely. And so the property journey, when did that start? Did you buy your home first or did you buy an investment property first?
I actually bought something that I thought it would be a bit of both. So if I want to move in, large 3-bedroom apartment up in a Rington area, which was almost brand new.
Yep.
But I didn't know much about the area, didn't know much about the property cycle, so I probably overpaid it a bit at the wrong time and all that, but I still hold it.
Yeah.
It's a nice property, and that's how it started.
Okay. Which year was this?
2003.
2003. And how long were you in the country at that time?
Less than 3 years.
Right. So we moved fairly fast in terms of getting into the property market. And then, so obviously once you got that property, you got to hang for what property meant in Australia, the process of purchasing and so forth. So when was the next property and what was it?
Next one was 2005. That was my PPOR at that time. And we realized that the market is slowing down, that the opportunities are presenting. So we dive into the journey. We bought that one, and that was nice. Still hold this property, one of the best we have. We were by sheer luck probably, or not understanding much the market, but we bought a good solid property investment.
So at this stage, we're still in New South Wales.
Yes.
How did lending pan out? Being a new migrant, not necessarily knowing how the banks viewed investors and homeowners, how did you embark down the path of getting the right money for the properties?
Yeah, I think what worked for us was our really being very strict and let's say disciplined with savings. We had really, quite a bit of savings, even with one salary initially. Then my wife started working.
Yep.
So banks didn't have a problem to lend to us. However, what almost brought us down was the GFC.
Yep.
When the interest went up on one loan to 9.3%, the other one was 8.7%. So there was enormous hit. So we almost went broke. We managed to survive, and we always remember that moment that you always have to have buffers in place. You never know what comes. But yeah, after that, next one was 2010. We bought actually 2 more properties, and in the meantime, I had some luck with some shares, and that from business that actually I managed to sell, and got a bit of a cash injection, and that's how the whole journey really started. But however, before we met, 2015-16, we realized, okay, our Sydney properties are getting a bit of equity, so we can do something. We want to keep borrowing, but we need to we were lost in where, how, what time, and that's how we got in touch 2016 with our first Victorian property. And everyone since we've done 6 after that in total. And when people ask me about buyers agents general, I said, well, all I can tell you is show the numbers. And I need to explain more. So every single one ended up, of course, in a very positive. It was a lot of work on my side as well. So it's not just one way that you just go to buy the agent and you buy property. It was, as you told me first time, Ratko, you need to really know what you want. You need to be decisive. You have 24 hours sometimes to reply. And our best deals were literally on a
Very
24 hour. Yes. But, have finance ready, all of that, know what your strategy is, know what you're going to do, and also the help of professionals that you guys have offered. In some cases, actually turned to be almost like no go for a certain property, because he would send me to a town planner and said, go and talk to him, see if it works for you.
Yeah.
After discussion with town planner, he said, I don't think this is the one right for you. Next day, we were looking for another one, and surely next deal was actually the right one. So I think that was the part I really like, this openness and support. So from town planners to local agents to rental agents, and I keep actually the most of them. Some of them retired already, but I keep the most of the agents that originally, RPG suggested to me.
Yeah, and the reason why I was keen to get you on the podcast is that a lot of people think when they start investing that, it's set and forget. Whereas you took an approach of initially set and forget because you bought a couple of properties. And then we've gone down the path of becoming very dynamic and chasing properties that you could value add pretty much straight away and taking a safe development twist. And you mentioned that, there's several properties that we put across where we'd go to the town planners to get surety before we sign contracts. And there would be hurdles on it in terms of, yes, it may be something that we could develop, but it wasn't a straightforward development. Whereas there are others where we'd put it in front of the town planners and bang, they say, yeah, this is a goer, absolute goer. How did you end up doing your numbers in terms of, let's say the first one, which was in Victoria? How did you go through in terms of the numbers? How did you work out the numbers? Was it a back of the envelope sort of thing, or did you, being an electrical engineer, plenty of spreadsheets, or was it just a simple gut feel?
Yeah. So to be honest, before we started working together, I was in more or less what most people get in, analysis paralysis. Too much of, checking and all that, and then you can't make decision. When we started, it was back of envelope, this basically calculation and insurance from your side, because if you recall, that was a street where you have purchased yourself too and another client, and you said, look, the prices have already started moving up. You're not going to get, for back then, there was a $250,000 for a house on 620 square meter block. He said, we used to pay 200, now it's 250. However, the market is moving so fast that this is going to go. So when I looked at it, it was like, okay, subdivision potential, I can build townhouse at the back. So there's no way we're going to lose money. It was about 5% yield. The land was close to land value basically, and area that it's growing. So for me, it was like all nice spreadsheets, all good. I actually did put all together and calculated profit but at the end of the day, decision was more fundamentals, key numbers, and it didn't take more than half an hour to really work it out. So the rest was due diligence, diversify, dig, and all that stuff, checking with town planners. But yeah, that's
which is one of the keys, right? Is that you are able to make decisions rapidly, so the opportunities didn't go by. But paying $250 back then in 2016 in that area, that was retail. It wasn't like it was a hugely discounted property. What we did pick up over there was more the opportunity of what we could do with the property. And it was still in a rentable condition. So what I'd like to do is for us to go through the process of that, from the time that we purchased to the fruition and the full strategy of that property, and very high level numbers. Obviously, we're talking almost 10, 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, it's 9 years ago. 2016 years.
Yeah, my maths is perfect. Yeah. 15 years ago, not. So obviously the figures would be very different today, right? We can't buy houses with development potential at 250. But it had moved, right? So when I bought my house in that same street, I had paid from memory, 180K for a similar home. But it had moved so much in that space of 1 year that we were paying pretty much 80K more than what I had paid. So how did the numbers stack out, and how did you do the numbers?
Okay, so the 250 purchase, I invested maybe 2,000 or 3,000 in just slightly cosmetically renovating house.
So this was a corner block, yeah?
Corner, that was a not corner block, the subdivision, like the Battle Lake subdivision.
Yep.
We worked out there is enough space on a side for a driveway. We looked at similar properties in the area, so council obviously allowed that. It was as usual, you get in the hands of after that some let's say people want to take advantage of yourself, you know. So some local town planners tried to convince me that I can do front parking, which was completely out of, and the council confirmed that. So there was another caution for everyone, you know who we're dealing with. So $250 purchase. Quickly after was rented for $250 a week, so no issues. Within let's say a year and a half, I worked out that development at the time, prior to all the inflationary pressures and cost rises, the build of a townhouse behind, it was $180,000 to subdivide the full process, finish everything, create a carport for the front, you know, all turnkey with the fencing, was all total $250,000. So investment was $250 plus $250, $500,000. Valuation shortly after was $900,000.
Okay, so you made money pretty much straight away, right? Well,
And
definition of straight away is this was an 18-month process?
So this was 18-month process, and the build was another 12 months, finished just before COVID, and rented out. However, also another important thing is that rental at the moment is like almost $750 a week, you know, on the same debt that I have. So it's a yield of income of 8% easily, you know, on that. That's another reason to hold. It was tempting to sell, but I realized that longer term is much better to hold, and you know, even despite ups and downs in the area, at the moment it's slightly depressed, but it's still sitting at around 850.
Yeah, because the original plan was that we'd build at the back and then sell the old home to reduce the debt, right? But then markets moved in our favor, and the rent certainly looks after the debt, so it wasn't impeding your borrowing, nor was it impeding lifestyle. So it's the perfect development. Sometimes people, when they go down the development path, they try and do too big, too grand a thing, and you've kept it really simple with all of your constructions that you've done. With the time frame that it took, were you still buying in between, or did you wait until this project finalized before you started buying again?
Okay, we continued, together. So 2016 we bought another one that was in Eastern Heights in Ipswich.
Yes.
Then after that we purchased in 2018 we purchased the Buval property.
Yep.
So the Eastern Heights ones was pretty straightforward. That one was very, very good pick for market. Very solid corner block, a brick house, which was almost abandoned by the landlord, and they wanted to get rid of it. There was some stolen air conditioner, whatever, but it took us only $3,000-4,000 to put it back in original shape. Corner block, of course, was ideal to put a granny flat at the back. At that time, I've done granny flat. That was actually the first one I've done. And then, so that's Eagleby. Sorry, we've done Eagleby, first. Yes. And then we've done Eastern, so my memory is laughing a bit. 2016, we've done Eagleby Yola Street. Straight away, we put a granny flat there. It was also straightforward $280K property, $110K for a 2-bedroom granny flat, plus fencing, whatever. At the end was like income of about, at that time, 600 and something. At the moment, it's rented for $850. So the rents are gone up significantly there. Next thing was Eastern Heights, similar numbers, but only one bedroom granny flat.
And that was the ruling in Ipswich that you
That's right. We couldn't do a 50 square meter one. So we've done that. So these ones were happening while I was planning Geelong development. And also I purchased that third one in Buval, which I actually rented out, converted from 2-bedroom to 3-bedroom. That was a one also where we had to pay a bit more and be quick. This is estate, and it's a huge, nice 1,000 square meter block in a medium density. At the moment, rules are changing, so we're rushing to get the DA there. But basically, that one will probably be subdivide, sell the front house, which is a beautiful 1912 Queenslander, and then do a triplex at the back. So council initially allowed duplex, but now they're saying, sorry, it's a high density. You need to have a 4 dwellings on a 1,000 square block.
That's interesting, right? So because sometimes most of the time, council will say, no, I don't want you to put as many dwellings. But this time round, council turn around and said, I want you to put more than what you want to put.
Exactly. For me, it was surprised. To be honest, a couple of years ago, 2020 is when I've done initial inquiry. It wouldn't be worth, at that time, dwellings were selling for 350. So the building cost and wouldn't make a business case. However, in today's market, with the front house that's going to pay off the whole lot basically after selling, it's a different story. So sometimes you have to really wait, and I know it's your strategy, I learned from you as well. Sometimes you can start immediately, sometimes you just land bank, park it, and then make sure that the income is covering cost. And that property was renting for $290, now it's $380 a week. So it's basically covering the cost, it's
even at today's interest rates. Yeah. So it's really important that, and I've done quite a few developments in my portfolio, that you wait at least a cycle, particularly in the slower moving market. So Queensland is a slower moving market, right? From the bottom of the cycle to the next peak takes 7 to 11 years. And we had sort of picked that at around the top end of that cycle back then, whereas in Victoria, much shorter cycles. So we were able to develop pretty much as soon as we bought. Of course, we had to go through the DA. It was a different beast in itself. But the cycle there is 3 to 7 years, right? So it's a lot more forgiving. And this is where a lot of people, I suppose, go wrong, is that they pull the trigger a bit too early and they start developing in a declining market, so that by the time everything's done, they actually owe more than what the property is worth, especially if it goes wrong on you in terms of build costs, right? So how were you able to contain your build costs across all this? Because you had pretty much 3-4 moving parts pretty much straight away. You had the DA process happening in Victoria. Then you had the granny flat happening, as well as another purchase happening and a modification of that Ipswich home from 2-bedroom to 3-bedroom.
Two granny flats.
2 granny flats. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So how did you manage the process? Were there any systems and procedures that you developed, and who were the stakeholders in that process as well?
Okay. So as usual, you need professionals in all areas. So my now 10 years with my mortgage broker. She's very, very good but initially she could not understand my strategy at a time when I learned from others that you actually create buffers and borrow money when it's time to do it. So for me, this was 2015. Before we started, I realized that my equity in Sydney properties is actually building up quickly. So let's start borrowing. Banks were very, very keen to borrow. Then they wouldn't ask what you want to spend for. So you could borrow easily, like even 7-digit numbers, and park them on the side without many questions. So that's what I've done. And I was just waiting with that money. It was easier to handle. Another thing is, another professional advice from accounting side. My accountant is a very, very experienced investor. So when he actually sat down and he said, look, you got to start diversifying, putting in a trust structure. If you want to hold a longer term, protect yourself, and various reasons why. And of course, it needs to suit my needs. So he looked at it particularly and he said, I suggest you do now all those properties basically, except for the Geelong. We've actually done all Queensland ones and all consequent ones that we bought. Another one in Victoria, another one in Perth. We actually put in trust. So trust allows you, and this is again without it's not a professional advice, but a financial advice of any kind. But as I understand it, that's what worked for me. Is if your trust is then self-sufficient, which means that the costs are covered by income. Basically, a lot of banks will actually only ask for a letter from your accountant and say, you don't need to worry about that. Let's assess your income. So to continue borrowing, that actually really helped me, especially with the low interest rates, that to keep trust in positive territory, and that way keep borrowing. And so that was the finest, plus having my money on the side, which is borrowed against the equity of other properties without banks asking questions or asking for security, allowed me to put enough deposit for all those purchases.
Okay. And it's really important that you brought that up, right? Because there's a lot of misconception about borrowing through trust. Whereas you went down the path of with the trust, you actually made the property self-sufficient within that trust, which then allowed you to get that letter and be able to continually borrow. So is there just the one trust, or did you form multiple trusts? How many assets in the trusts?
Okay, so for buy and hold, I only have one trust.
Yep.
And later on, I formed a separate for build and sell, which is another branch of my property journey that I've started 3 years ago. I'm continuing there, so that's separate entity. So in that trust, and so any property that I would buy, park there, immediately build, get granny flat or do whatever it's possible to increase the income. So bring it to 8%, 9% sort of yield. That's the whole trick. There's no much. It's pretty simple. So it just needs to have, and of course, trust loans cost a little bit more, so you have to be prepared to pay maybe 0.5% more, or is less flexibility. However, there are.
But it allows you to get into the
Yes.
Yeah. And if I come back to then Victoria, so you've got the DA, there would have been conditions on it in terms of what you need to do and what you can't do on those. How did you step through all of those conditions on the DA? And were there any learnings in that process as to, okay, I didn't see that one coming?
Okay. So I'd say lucky. Firstly, I had advice from you guys along the way. So even after purchase, we had regular catch-ups and all that. So I got a few tips on who to use and how. And then I started searching for a builder, and I found literally on Google a very, very, very good builder. I'm still in touch with. So having open conversation with him actually helped. So I didn't want to push the limits. So do I do a 2-story or single story? Do I want to maximize? To be honest, I was more like, let's go the cheaper and then more safe path. So I went with a single story so that my neighbors would not object much. 2-bedroom, no problem. I don't need much bigger than that. A 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom townhouse. There were some tricky things about services, of course, so one of them was a stormwater. That was a big surprise. So again, without the help of builder, it would have probably ended up very, very costly with the special pumps, and for absolutely no reason, because the practical engineering reason. The whole site has a slope towards the street. LPOD, or legal point of discharge, is on the street, but somehow council had this ridiculous request. However, obviously having connections and knowing people there, builder had a couple of phone calls there, and they said, look, there's opportunity to pay some contributions. And that's, no one told you that, but they told me that's a possibility. And, so we ended up pretty much with an extra contribution, which was next to nothing compared to having a separate meter, pump, legal agreement and all that. So that was one big learning, that, you really need to have a good builder and good people on the ground to help you. It's always option, it's not, even, I haven't really come across any serious problem in that build. Whatever the estimates were, it ended up plus minus basically on the money. I called the builder last year to ask him, and he said, unfortunately, Ratko, if we had to do it now, it's almost double the cost. So it's like $350K almost to build the same that costed in 1999, costed 180,000, but
And that's true for everything, right? So as we go through cycles, your price does increase, both from the purchase point of view and also construction point of view as well. So one of the things I say to people is that if you're delaying your journey, what you're really doing is consenting to pay more for the property, right? Because if we were to start the journey today, that same property would be paying close to $550, if not slightly more, because it was in good condition. And then the construction itself, pretty much double. So the numbers wouldn't have worked.
Exactly. It's that aspect. And another one that I would, if I'm to start now the same journey and build, almost a portfolio, almost dozen properties, no way the banks will let me today do that in the same way. So people like when they come to me, private bankers, and say, okay, we want to get you bundle deal, reduced, we can save you X amount of dollars, and I have calls almost weekly. The one thing that I tell them is flexibility. I need to really keep finance, and not to the cheapest, but the one that's going to allow me to continue. And I'm still in a accumulation phase, let's say, not the consolidation phase, which probably is going to come soon. I'm getting older, but preparing for retirement eventually. However, the flexibility is important. The choice of lenders and how you do it, and timing. So getting equity at the right time, parking that and being prepared. And one thing that I've learned is this X factor. Every year X factor comes. We don't know what it is. All you can do is prepare money on the side, prepare all other buffers, and deal with it. But if you don't borrow money when it's time, you'll not get money when you need it, because usually it's going to be a more difficult, high interest rates. Banks will be less keen to lend it.
Yeah, I'm glad you opened the door because I wanted to talk to you about the lending side of things, right? Because as people build their portfolio, even if they're starting with one, there's so much conflicting information, and the tendency is for brokers to say, okay, let's put everything together. I'll get a much cheaper interest rate. It'll be easier to get the loan through. How are your loans structured? Are they cross-securitized, or are they all separate with different lenders, or is it a mixture of some are conjoined, the others are separate?
Okay. My principle was to try and avoid cross securitization. However, I couldn't avoid that, especially my senior properties had a larger equity. So
Yep.
I had to actually borrow and in some cases cross securitize. However, as the equity started building up, I managed to untangle some of them. So
Yep.
I have very little entanglement now. And even some properties actually do not have any loans against because it's borrowed on others. So I keep usually one or two properties with no encumberment. That way I can offer that to, when I build to sell, I offer that as security to a lending company for construction loan, for instance, and they love it. They just grab land and a house with no debt, and it's easy. And also quite often there is a situation, especially when we need to do a settlement, quick settlement, and in a good deal, quick deal. And we had this last property purchase. I actually did not get a loan. So the idea was to get separate loan, but what I've done is I've got a top up on the existing, and so it's all really having a good mortgage broker, but explaining strategies to them, and as I said initially, I actually invested quite a bit of time to educate my mortgage broker actually why I'm doing certain things based on advice of property advisors, and now she's very very versed with. She can see exactly where but going with the harder ones to lend first, and then down the track going to the ones that are easy to lend is it's typically conflicting. People don't like that because they have to pay extra 0.2%, 0.3%.
Yeah.
But I keep telling them, look, that's in a journey. It's the cost they have to pay.
Absolutely. And this is where people go wrong, is they get too interest rate focused rather than finance solution, because sometimes you have to make an exception to principles, right? So the general principle is that you tend not to cross securitize properties. But if that's the only way you can get the purchase over the line or get access to more money, then that's how you do it, right? And I'm guilty of that as well. I had recently sold a property, and that was cross-securitized with 3 or 4 other properties. That's the only way I could get the finance on that, and then they haven't untangled it. And the banks turned around and said, well, I'm going to revalue everything, and I'm going to only release 10% of the sales proceeds to you until I've revalued everything. This is the entire portfolio in that section. So that's one of the downsides of doing cross-securitization. But in my case, that was the only way I could get finance. So that's, it's in the nature of the beast, as they say. With finance, obviously, with you pulling out equity before you need it and forward planning by having properties unencumbered, how does the accountant handle this moving around of money?
Okay. Well, it's every tax return. I have to probably reserve 2 or 3 days to sit down and update the spreadsheet. So the accountant will only act on the numbers I gave him, and it's a messy spreadsheet, which actually shows the primary property and some secondary loans and all that. So account is perfectly okay with that, as long as the apportioning we do is correct. But it's quite a bit of work. And people ask me, can you outsource this? Well, it's quite difficult, so I need to spend that time.
Because it's all up here, isn't it?
Well, it's on that spreadsheet, and and I know what I've done. So I start from 1 year to another, and all of it. As whenever I have opportunity to untangle, I actually remove, and I love to keep one primary loan on a, because I normally take 80% if I take loan. So 20% needs to come from another property. It doesn't come from my savings, from my coffee money. It doesn't. So that's where
coffee.
Yeah, exactly. So people ask, where do you get the money? I said, look, all that money, or people are scared of borrowing. And I said, well, as long as you park it, you don't touch it. It's an offset account. It doesn't exist. It's not your money. It's borrowed against property. It's just a number. Don't be scared of it. But, of course, don't go and buy luxury cars, or, throw in pamper yourself occasionally, but don't, that's not a good way to build a, So that discipline and being conscious and treat it as a business. That's what I think I heard a lot of property advisors saying, that, unless you treat your property portfolio as a business and look really into it as if it's a profit and loss. You need to have P&L statement, basically. It doesn't need to be a detailed one, but you need to know where you stand at the end of the day. And I have my accountant asking me, like, there is one property here. I'm gonna tell the story. It's he keeps asking me, why are you holding this property? Okay, so it's kind of it was a loss leader, like we would, maybe a couple of thousand a year, but it was bought in the wrong time. It was an advisor I used before, which I don't deal with anymore. I realized only that advisor had a fall off with his man on the ground just 10 days before I bought a property. So that advice was definitely not in my favor.
Yep.
However, I spoke to a couple of people after that. Year later, I realized that my equity is going down, or there's not much equity. The rents are going down because it's all population. It's a Brisbane CBD, and it was 2012. So bought in the wrong time. So they started building around new buildings. So rent went from $380 down to $300, and the value went from $380, which was quite expensive at the time, maybe to $350, $60. So it wasn't too bad, but
So
it
this
was
is
certainly
a house or a unit?
a unit.
Yeah.
However, people, real estate advisors said, look, this is fantastic property, fantastic area, longer term it'll work. And surely, back to 2025, that property is now worth much more money and it's positive. But that property helped me, and I think there's a story about Kerry Packer and Alan Bond about the check. So every time I get somebody offering me a deal, I always remember that, and I say, I'm not going to get another lemon to it. So, and I think it saved me much more money on not doing things, and that was my psychological way to deal. So I explained to my accountant, I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to keep it to remind me that, we can always get a bad deals if you're not careful, and
Because you gloss over the numbers, or you're caught up in just purchasing another property, right?
Yeah.
And I've got a similar property in my portfolio where it's I've spoken about this in podcasts before, where it's a serviced apartment in Salamander Bay. I probably can't give it away. I had bought it in a flash of vanity, thinking I'll take my friends and family there. The kids don't want to go there anymore because they've been there so many times, and it's probably better rented out than someone going and visiting. So every now and then I send friends there to just have a weekend, but that's my lemon in my portfolio. And it gives you a reality check, right? Because it gives you the grounding to say, hey, keep it real, don't go high flying, and don't change the formula. Because what works, you just keep adjusting that formula rather than changing the strategy altogether. So we've gone down the strategy of doing subdivisions and construction. So you've got 3 granny flats, two that you've built, 3 granny flats now. There's one more that you built.
The granny flats, the one I'm thinking now, our last purchase in Ballarat. Actually, that's what I'm thinking. But still, because I have 3 deals at the moment running, construction and another subdivision, and that one. So I'll wait and to see how it goes, because real estate agents are not convincing me that they can rent out for the money that so it's about $180,000 now to do granny flat. It used to be 100, so I need to think about.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the numbers don't quite work as well as it used to before.
Correct.
And if you were to start this journey all over again, let's say we had wiped the slate clean and we started all over again, what would you do differently today?
Okay. I would not, to be honest, touch any apartments, anything strata, maybe townhouses, but I would go with houses where I could build, subdivide, actually properties where I can add value, no matter what happens with the market value.
Yeah.
So even if it drops 10-20%, if I can actually add 50% by subdividing, by building, I would always go with that, and then keep building cash flow in order to allow me to borrow and continue. And the whole story about a never-ending discussion about where do you go more influential areas to actually buy properties where the higher capital gains will happen. Surely that's, if you have a spare cash and you want to set and forget, that's a good way. And that's why I have a blend of some of those in Sydney, which actually did bring me a value, like equity, but it took a few years actually before I could extract and all that. Without them, I wouldn't be able to borrow the others. However, without the properties where I could build a yield quickly and value, I wouldn't be able to continue the whole journey.
Absolutely. And so this is testament to the journey, right? So when you start, so long as you can afford, you want to get the growth property in first, because that gives you the cornerstone. And off that growth, you can leverage into some dynamic properties like the subdivision or the house plus granny flat, where you're then offsetting the negative cash flow the growth property is brought in. But it then allows you yet again to recycle the debt to go again. So it continues, allows you to continue to build the portfolio without really putting your lifestyle at risk. Because that's one of the things that you go through these phases of, okay, yeah, sometimes you get sleepless nights. But the reality is that with your dozen properties that you have, it hasn't significantly changed your lifestyle in the sense that you're not having to think, where's my next restaurant meal going to come from?
Exactly.
Yeah. So have you, having said that, with the debt that you carry, have you had any sleepless nights, and how do you handle carrying those debt?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of friends actually asking me that, and it's quite scary level of debt. But the over years with all those value add things, LVR percentage is quite low, which means that, and being diversified geographically, type of property, if anything goes wrong again, first of all, buffers on the side, use buffers if things go wrong. Always, buy every Saturday financial review.
Yep.
We go through, a few numbers there and look at when it's the right time to lock maybe part of the portfolio. I've done it in wrong time and I lost money on locking, but I've done it actually in right pretty well actually this time as well. And some of them are just coming out of now 2%, 2.5%.
Nice.
Yeah, so I had that benefit. Some of them are left, so it's always more like I'm risk averse. So I love to do like half, and I could have done more. That is how I deal with it. I have no problem with sleeping in a night, as long as again buffer is on a bank account on the side, and I know that I can sell if let's say I need something, I can sell in Queensland 1 or 2, or Victoria 1 or 2, or Western Australia or New South Wales. Markets will go up and down, so it'll always be one area where it'll be okay to sell even without going loss, and and then if needed multiple. So no, as long as the debt is the actually right debt, not the consumer debt. I'm very cautious about consumer debt, and do buy nice car occasionally, but I love to drive cars for many years instead of buying every year new one, and also around my house. I like to be okay, but nothing fancy, and so that's where I think people get stuck with so you need to be really disciplined with finance and understand that, and that's where the peace comes from, like.
Yeah. So no Ferrari yet?
No
Ferrari. Any Ferrari in the horizon?
Probably not.
Yeah. Okay.
I like vintage cars, so I got another vintage car that I've parked, and it's all very, very
What
cool.
sort of vintage car is that?
Well, I bought an SLK Mercedes with 25,000 kilometers on it from somebody who looked after it, so it's a coming vintage car. I can see in English, in a UK magazine, it says it's going to become soon. It's just 20 years. So, and, I'm looking at few more MGs, and I was, I don't have a big enough garage, so obviously I need to, but that's basically where, I love.
Maybe we should work on, the next DA is getting the garage expansion happening.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
obviously with the portfolio, right? We started out with a vision. We initially, you had a portfolio of townhouses and units. We started with a vision of, okay, let's turn this on its head. We started with Victoria, when it was not fashionable to buy in Victoria, then everyone was buying in Queensland at that time. Yeah. And then we pivoted back to Queensland, where the prices were cheaper and the cash flow was better in Queensland. And then we've got exposure in Perth, and we've done a full circle, and our latest purchase was back in Victoria.
Correct. Even we started with New South Wales actually as an idea, which is what I came in and said, look, how about we actually start looking around? And then
we couldn't make the numbers work.
Yeah, we couldn't make numbers work. And I said, well, look, guys, you know the best. I'm not in a rush. So let's just call me. Let's keep fishing, whatever we find. And then I got a call from your team saying, look, we have one property that is really good value for money. So, and I think it definitely is. It's the area where if I read the let's say other commentaries, it says don't go there and it's not going to recover for some time. Then you read another one saying no, it's at the bottom. So basically, buying a house for 55,000 above the land value, and it's a solid house, rentable. Yeah, you can't go wrong. And it's also a size of land, 700 square meters, 690, that I can put granny flat or subdivide across the school. Again, it was like pretty straightforward, and yeah, it wasn't much. Surely there's all the challenges here and there, but for I think when the things were presented, it took me a day to respond, and we just went through it.
So how do you do your checks? So let's say we present a property to you. How do you do your checks to say, okay, yeah, it sits well with me?
Okay, so basically I look at worst case scenario always. What if something goes wrong and the property value drops down? Firstly, what does this property offer to me? Where does it fit in my portfolio? So when I looked at that property, it was like, it's good for a longer term hold. It is another regional center, second largest regional center in Australia. I have already 2 dwellings in a largest, which is Geelong. So that from that perspective, we passed the test. Next time we looked at the suburb, and that suburb was very, very interesting. It's Wendouree, where there is a lake Wendouree, and properties are like multi-million around the lake. So the median is actually pushed up to about 500,000 in that, or around 500. And this property was only, well, we ended up buying it at 305 was the final price. 350 is the offer that somebody else put, and they couldn't get a finance. And I think we negotiated 310, 305 was final. So even when I went there to visit, neighbor came out and I said, no, you bought it really, well,
And Wendouree has got a bad rap, right? So people say that it's a really rough area, low socioeconomic. But there's streets and there are streets, right? So you have to just buy in the right street to be able to make money.
Exactly.
And have hassle-free properties in there. So when you've bought properties, you've visited every single property during the purchasing phase, or have you seen properties afterwards?
So most of them I did, and the lemon that I mentioned is the one that I didn't see, But yes, every house basically that I visited to just again as a peace of mind. Didn't find anything that already wasn't present to me, or but it was good to get a bit of a feel of neighborhood, as you said, drive around. And so surely Geelong was another one where you see scary, burn marks on a street and neighbors and plywooded house, which is a lot of people would just run away. And I have friends from Melbourne that actually drove with me, and they said, "You are insane. Like buying this here, you're insane. Why would you buy this area?" And they lived there for 25 years. And I said, "Well, look, all the numbers match up."
And there was change afoot, right? The demographics was changing, and a lot of the times when people see houses with plywood on the windows all shut up, it's usually government housing that they're trying to sell down, and it does give an unsightly look while they're still trying to sell it down, because their process is usually 6 months before the property hits the market, right? So it does bring the vista of the street down quite a bit as they shutter up all of the houses they have in the street. But it's a clear indicator that that street's now no longer going to be housing commission or government housing. It's largely going to be privately owned. So it's a good time to actually get in before the change is really evident. You'll see all of the snippets of changes happening. You want to be the not necessarily the trailblazer in that area, but you need to see some movement of change happening and then jump in.
Some identification.
That's right.
Well, in this particular case in North Lane, I finished my townhouse, and fence towards that plywooded house, which was plywooded maybe 4 months before I finished the house. I was like, oh my God, what I'm getting in, what's going to happen there? So the fence was leaning, and I was thinking whether to replace. Then I asked the agent to check. It was a housing commission, of course. And basically I said, okay, I'll leave it. That's fine. They called me during COVID times, and they said, look, we stuffed up something about timing. It's only 1 day before you need to respond. But all we need from you is acceptance of a new fence. It'll cost you zero. Nothing. So I actually got a $3,500 back in the pocket by doing nothing. And it's now 3 townhouses actually built on that side, like, totally different. As you said, you have to take risks sometimes, you can't, but,
But these were very calculated risks, right? We saw what was happening on the ground, and there was risk mitigation in the sense that we bought well, so that even if those changes didn't fully flesh out, we still had enough meat in the deal to be able to spin away from it. So what's Ratko doing in 5 years' time?
Well, I'll need to start thinking about, let's say consolidation phase, probably with buy and hold. Obviously, that what I'm going through with Buval property is now let's subdivide, let's try and sell the front. It can basically pay off the original debt and then fund partially the development at the back. I really want to hold, let's say, the best part of the portfolio. They still diversify, like to hold and rent out. And that's for me the best way to keep, along with the super money. And I don't mix super with properties, because everything else that I have is basically in properties. So my super is normally in a retail fund and with shares and international shares and mix and blends and whatever. But there's one thing that we've learned from this inflationary period is that inflation will devalue the money. And it's not that properties are always rising in value, it's the loss of value of the money that we used to buy them more. So we need something to hedge the inflation. So, and for me, property is always a good way. So being a asset with a inherent value plus yield, both of them are over time growing. And what I've learned during COVID times, I have not lost $1 of rent from a dozen of rental properties. Not a single dollar. So we kept the rents under control. Like we didn't want to put people in trouble. We understood that, but tenants were paying in time. Every single if it was commercial property, for me this is where the dilemma was for the last few years. Should I really diversify more in commercial? I probably should, but for now I'm more and again, this is how I sleep well. Just all the properties are insured. If I had in one property a situation where a tenant was apparently was caught in dealing some illicit substances. Luckily, they did test. They didn't contaminate property, and this is another thing that we need to be aware of. You need to have insurance for those situations because it may cost you $100,000 to strip down property to rebuild and all that. But again, with insurances in place, with a good strategy, I think I will continue building and selling in my separate vehicle, which is a building company under separate trust. First property was already done and sold very successfully down in Batemans Bay. So now we are in another very close by with the same builder, about to start a deal, sign off the contract, and it's happening pretty quickly. So that's going to be my focus as I slow down in my. I'm still full-time running an engineering company in Sydney, and I'm electronics. But I'm planning, let's say, around the age of 60 to slow down and continue, not to stop. But
So with the bills and sell downs, you're using those monies to pay down the debt on the existing portfolio?
Correct.
Okay, so if someone was, two-pronged question, right? So if someone was just starting out and they said, oh, this is so much more complicated than I thought, what's your advice to them?
Keep it simple. Again, and I've, like some of my colleagues they came to me and asked me what can we do? And my recommendation is find the right professionals, try yourself, and they try for a year or two, going spinning a circle again, where to buy, what to buy, get a courage, So some of them actually did take advice and they're talking to buyer's agents. And I think that's the starting point. Buy property where you don't hope for equity just to come through a market move. Try if you have any knowledge or let's say courage to go into buying even property that's been run down. Always work out, first of all, strategy, get your finances right, and then start small. Don't go with any big, and I'm not building anything bigger than duplexes at the moment. Simple, risks are under control. It's all, don't lose your sleep over, don't let it, but don't wait. Waiting is the worst. And, my daughters already, they wanted to get into property journey, and they bought, we obviously helped them to get with deposits to get into the apartment. So, next step, I would advise them to join us with a development or, to try and get more
experience.
Yes,
that's right. Because these things don't get taught in schools. No. Not through your engineering degree or any financial institute will give you this. It's something that you need to actually do to be able to really get the education behind you. And then what you're doing now is passing it down to the next generation. So, starting from the grandfather, doing buildings, that's given you that thought process. Now you've you've started doing your small developments that are very safe, and now you're introducing the kids to it as well.
Yeah, I always remember my grandfather sitting with his advisors. He had only 2 years of primary school. His parents passed away in First World War, and he was orphaned basically. So his building calculation was completely back on my envelope. So they will tell him what the numbers are. He'll look at it and say, not good enough. They'll come back, oh, sorry, made a mistake. They'll recalculate again and again. And he'll keep going, no, sorry, not good enough. Until he sees profit and, numbers looking okay. So he wouldn't go into details and all that. Just say, okay, now we're good enough. And one thing he said to me, once you commit to something, you're going to finish. Even if you lost, finish it. Next time, be more careful, So persistence and hard work. But
that's one of the first things I said to you when we started the development side of it. If it doesn't work on the back of an envelope, forget all the spreadsheets and all that. It does not work, right? Because you need to justify the numbers without putting in all of the fluff in it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it may not, like development in Geelong, for instance. When I put numbers together, the profit, instant profit, if I sell straight away, and of course you have to pay GST, this and that, wouldn't work very well. Yeah. So selling agents try to actually let me in, like, because they needed property to sell.
Of course.
And you go, just offload. So instead of maybe picking up at that time $90,000 maximum, I ended up with maybe 400,000, with good yield.
Yes.
Which, is more a holding, more it pays off itself. So that equity will stay and grow, and yield will eventually turn this property completely positive. So that's the longer term strategy is always important. Don't go by a short term, maybe gain. I can maybe buy a nice car with that, whatever. No. Think about.
Play the long game.
Yes.
Yeah. So final question. Someone that's already got a portfolio, what advice would you give to them in today's market?
I would suggest them to do regular, treat it as a business is the key. Be honest with yourself, go with your accountant through the numbers, see how it works for you compared to strategy, and make tough decisions if needed. And also see how these properties are going to get you to the final journey. So is it a cash flow property? Is it a property where you have a lot of equity, but the cash flow is not the best? So it's maybe better to move money elsewhere. But be proactive, because time flies, and things are changing. So use the equity and use the opportunity when you have it. Don't leave it passively. So big change for me was that 2015-16 when I decided to actively start dealing with the property, and it did cost me a lot of sleepless nights at that time to actually sit down and work with builders initially directly. Later on, I started engaging property professionals, actually paying them to do it for me. And when people go, how can you do all of that? Like, how do you manage all of that? To be honest, it's maybe 2-3 hours a week overall, in the morning, in the afternoons, on the weekend. All those agents that send you emails, if they need something to repair, just go. Like, I don't dwell much. If it needs to be repaired, approve, move on, and that way you keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've systemized it really well, and you're reactive to the problems and to the opportunities, which is the testimony to the portfolio you've built, right? So I would really like to thank you from the bottom of my heart to be able to share your story, because I'm pretty sure that you've inspired a whole lot of people to actually take a more pragmatic approach in the investing rather than just being passive, because your numbers and the portfolio you've built is testimony to the fact that you've treated it as a business, and you've gone the hard yards of actually learning how to develop, and you've made it a business. Yeah. Any last words before you go?
No, all I can say is thank you very much to you and the team for 9 years of very, very good collaboration, and I look forward to our next seventh deal.
Yep, we'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.